After more than a year hiatus, I started to pick up piano lessons again recently. Now, getting back into it, I'm reminded of how awkward it can be at first, how slow I am as I am moving from one note on the keyboard to the next. And then adding in my left hand, things can get pretty dicey. But then there's this moment when your hands know what to do and they just start to find their rhythm. And you know that it has clicked in your brain. It's maybe moved from a different part. And it goes from being really conscious and awkward to unconscious, and your fingers are flowing. And I've been thinking about this idea of rhythm a lot lately as I've been playing piano, but not just that. Also, when I think about routines and I think about my work and the year ahead. Without even fully realizing it, over the past few months, I've actually transitioned from following more of what I call a schedule based routine into what I'm referring to now as a rhythm based routine. And today I'm going to share what I mean when I say that, an example from my real life of the shift that has happened without knowing it, and why this matters to me and why it matters right now. And if this idea resonates with you, I've got some questions that you can consider if you want to try on this transition. So, the first thing I want to clarify is, what do I mean when I say a schedule based versus a rhythm based routine? And the other way you could phrase this is the concept of time based routines or sequence based routines. And there are some connections, and in some ways they're quite similar, but the vibe is different, and how I approach it, even mentally, it is different for me. There is still an element of timing that shows up, but this is informed by past experience of how things approximately how long they take. And so I'm taking that into it. So I want to show an example, and this is with my mornings. Now, keep in mind when I show you this, I am self-employed, and so I do have autonomy over my schedule, and I really try to block those early morning hours out for me, and I try not to put anything in my calendar until after about 10 or 10:30, preferably in the afternoons. So I just wanna say that as a caveat because I know not everyone has the same schedule or the same circumstances. But let's actually show it. So here you can see an example of, if you are watching the video. If you're not, what I'm showing right now is a calendar. It's just a snapshot of a calendar, and this is what I used to try to do is block out specific times of when I do things in the morning. I would start with journaling for about half an hour, usually around 8:15. Then by about 8:45, I wanted to transition into writing, and that's writing for work. Now, just as a little side note, for me personally, I would sit down at, I call it my writing desk, and it's just a desk separate from my office. It's near a big window, and that is where I like to write, and I have fewer distractions. So it's much easier for me to journal and write without getting swept into my day just yet. So during that time, journal, and then I would write until about 9:45, and then I would try and transition up to my office, spend about 15 minutes where I look at the day ahead, go through my planner, make sure I add anything I need, and then I also spend a little bit of time going over the day before. So instead of recapping my day at the end of the day, because I always skip it, I do this in the morning, and I'll just take a look at how yesterday went. Then I will shift into focused work. So this is maybe a major project that I'm working on, or just something that deserves my attention because this is my best time of day for focused work. So that is how I would follow this schedule, is that I wanted to try to be at my desk working on a main project by 10 a.m. And what I noticed is that over time there was a lot of guilt and pressure, and stress was starting to pile up. So instead of adhering to a schedule, I started to adopt more of a rhythm. And this is still following the same sequence, but I don't have hard and fast times attached to them. I do not have things blocked in my calendar. I just know that I'll start with journaling for however long it takes. I'll go into writing, which usually is about double the amount of time. I know that typically when I am doing my daily kind of check-in, planning, and also reviewing the next day, it still takes in and around 15 minutes, but not always. And then my focused work. And these look so similar side by side if you're seeing the video version, but I just described doing the same thing. And I know how long they take based on experience. I mean, I tried to follow this approximate schedule for over a year. So I generally know, but the mood has shifted, and it has shifted considerably. You see, when I would follow the rigid schedule, I would notice that if I started my day a little later, I started with pressure, and then the whole morning I'm feeling that pressure and that stress. And then if something interrupts me during that morning, maybe I have to take a phone call or something, I would start to then the stress would rise even more. So my nervous system was just starting in this really elevated situation in the morning. I was stressed, it was flowing into my work, and then I always felt like I was behind. And I would start to resent any kind of interruption because things weren't going according to the plan as I had scheduled in my calendar. However, when I flipped to this idea of, you know what, I'm going to follow a flow of things that naturally have worked for me, but I'm not going to stress out about exactly when I start and exactly when I transition to the next one. If I know that there is something coming up in my calendar, maybe I do have an appointment or a call I need to be on, that is okay. I will adjust the rhythm and the tempo. And so this is actually where a lot of the piano stuff has come in, where I have noticed that this is attractive to me, to my brain, and to my nervous system because I am able to adjust the tempo based on what is going on, what my circumstances are. Now, when I teach the momentum formula, I always emphasize and encourage people to look inward at how do you naturally work. So for me, letting go and releasing a timetable was extremely freeing and had real impacts on my nervous system and my stress levels. For others, the mere suggestion of releasing a timeline might actually create stress. And this is all about understanding how you are wired. And for me, the timeline source of stress. For others, the timeline might be a source of calm. And I think it's really helpful to understand the difference. And I think that's good context as I start to talk about this and why this is something that has worked well for me. So, this self imposed pressure and clock, that just was not working. Now, one of the other things that I want to share is that when it comes to sharing this, since making the shift, yes, I'm more calmer, I'm more present. And I'm talking about an example with my morning routine. But if I'm being honest, and I do my best to be honest with this podcast, there was really a deeper reason why I had this shift and this focus on rhythm over a schedule. You see, at the start of 2025, I had a timeline mapped out for how I was going to run my business. I was making a pivot with my content, my focus, and what I was doing. And I had it planned out month by month. But life had other plans, threw me a major curveball I didn't see coming. And I ended up losing my brother after his sixth battle with cancer. And it was a months long battle. The schedule I had planned, it fell apart. It completely collapsed. And during those months when everything was happening, there were some weeks where I had the capacity and I also had a desire to work on my business, but I didn't know which notes to play. I didn't know what was coming next because my schedule was reset to zero and I felt really lost during those times. So, as 2025 was drawing to a close, I started to think about how can I start to adopt more of this rhythm-based approach overall, choosing which notes I like to play in which order, knowing that when life happens, and it will, I can adjust the tempo. I can slow it down. I can even take a pause if I need to, but then I can play the next note once it's time to play again. If you are listening to this concept and it's appealing to you, maybe there's a part of your brain that says, you know what? I actually don't love the pressure of timing and calendar and all of that. It feels very prescriptive and maybe too rigid. So let's talk about what you consider. But before I get into this, I think it's really important to point out that I am self-employed and I have a lot of autonomy over my schedule. And you might be listening thinking, that must be nice, Kat, but my days are way too scheduled, way too structured for this to work. And it is possible that it might not work well in some or many aspects of your life as it is right now. But there may be some pockets of your week where this could work or you could experiment with it, even if it's a short time frame. Now, I shared the example of my morning as I start my workday, but I am experimenting with other parts of my week for how I can start to establish this more rhythm-based routine for practices that are important to me. So if you're thinking about this, what I first recommend is you say to yourself, what practices do I want to establish as more of this consistent routine that I could follow with this approach. When do they normally happen? Where do they normally happen? And do you already have a sequence that you kind of naturally follow anyway? Is that working well? Are there things you want to change? And maybe you've got a few things that you do pretty regularly as part of an existing routine, but you want to add something new to it. Maybe it's a new practice that you'd like to adopt. Could you pair that? Does it fit somewhere naturally within what you already do? And what is the first thing you do to kick off this routine? When I talked about the morning, I actually skipped a part. What's one of the triggers for me is actually once my coffee is ready, then I sort of migrate over to that desk and I start that process. So really coffee comes first. But let's say, for example, you wanted a wind down routine at the end of the day. What practices would you want to include? Maybe you put away your phone for the night and don't go back to it, or you choose your clothing or put it out for the next morning, whether that's for work or maybe exercising. Maybe you are reading a chapter of a book or doing an evening meditation, having a warm drink like tea. Everyone has a different thing that they might like for a wind down routine at the end of the day. So, what is the natural flow? Maybe it's moving throughout your house, there's a natural flow, or if you make a warm tea before you read your book, whatever that is. What is the trigger that starts this whole routine? And maybe it's something, a nightly practice you already do. So if you are putting kids to bed, or maybe at the end of the evening, you start to run the dishwasher, and that can be your trigger. Or you can be like me and actually set a reminder. So for me, I use my watch a lot, or it could be on your phone of just saying, oh, hey, it's time to get started with your routine. That sounds like it's a schedule-based thing, but everything after that first thing is actually just following a rhythm, a sequence, and not a timeline. Not, I will read for 15 minutes and then I will meditate for 10 minutes. That to me is more rigid, and that's where my stress starts to rise. Try this out for a week. Notice what happens. Pay attention to your reactions. How do you feel mentally? How do you feel physically? How's your nervous system doing? Is this a good fit for you? Do you even like the song you're playing? What are the notes you're playing, and do you like it? This is the intentional experimentation phase when you are observing what works and you're making adjustments based on what you learn. And it is easy to rush past this part, but it actually really matters. And I think we often assume that a new routine is we're gonna get into the practice really quickly, but that's just not always the case. At the start of this episode, I mentioned that I was returning to the piano after a long hiatus. You see, the last time that I was learning the piano consistently, I hit a wall. I was learning chord inversions, and I just could not seem to keep pace with the lessons. I wanted to keep pace with the lessons that I'd been following, and suddenly I was struggling and it was frustrating, and things were not clicking on the same timeline that they had with previous lessons. Instead of sticking through the uncomfortable phase, I stepped away, and before I knew it, months had passed. And I tell this story because anytime we are learning something new, including what routine might work well for us consistently, there is this conscious phase where when we're learning something new, we are watching what happens, we're learning what works, what doesn't, decide what to try next, and then we keep this cycle continuing. This is how we learn. And sometimes things will click quickly, and then we shift more into this unconscious phase where sort of our hands take over or our routines and rhythms take over, and you're not thinking so much about it. But when things don't click according to the way we expected, maybe other routines really snapped into pace quicker, but these don't, we often will walk away too early, or we didn't stay in that conscious period long enough. And if you are starting out to test something new, whether it's schedule based or rhythm based, there is this conscious period that might feel awkward and clunky and slow as you are figuring it out. And that's really natural. So I want you to stay with it and notice what happens. You can make intentional adjustments because eventually you will learn what works for you and find your rhythm.